Hello and welcome to Pod Sequentialism. I'm your host, Matt Kennedy. Pod Sequentialism is, of course, brought to you by Meltdown Comics and Collectibles and also by Gallery 30 South in Pasadena. And we'd like to give a shout out to the So Plant Wacko Superstore in Hollywood. Meltdown Podcasting Network has a lot of other great shows that we encourage you to listen to, and you can find those also on the Meltdown Podcast pages on the Meltdown Comics site. And we are joined today via Skype by someone I've been very excited to talk to, someone who was introduced to me by Chris Milligan, who's the publisher over at Trine Day Press. Trine Day have, among other publications, brought to light some of the things that have been appearing in majorly promoted documentaries in stuff we're seeing on Netflix. And he's been publishing for, at this point, I think 10 years, and getting a lot of esoteric subject matter out there. And on a list of people that Chris had recommended I talk to was a guy named Dyer. And I realized shortly after he recommended Jay to me that I had already been very much enjoying a show that Jay has on the Gaia network called Decoding Hollywood, in which he and his other co-host Jay take a specific film and dive deep behind what the message on the surface of the film is to bring up and reference esoteric subjects, alchemy, and the things that are very, very probably put into place by the filmmakers purposely, and that are kind of a little extra treat for you to be able to pick up if you like these films. But what helped lead to the Decoding Hollywood show was a book that Jay had written called Esoteric Hollywood, in which he outlined some of that sort of underpinning to what we see in pop culture. So without further ado, welcome to the program, Jay.
Thank you, Matt. I'm glad to be here. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, no, like we were saying, it's I always love it when we have a situation where there's somebody that is recommended that it turns out that it's somebody that I really already wanted to talk to anyhow. So as I pointed out, I have been very much a fan of your show on Gaia, and Decoding Hollywood it's one of those shows that I don't just watch the episode once. I watch them again and again. Sometimes I watch them again and again back to back. Sometimes I grab a block of the programming and we go through 3 or 4 episodes at a time. I've got my wife watching it and enjoying it, and it's hard to get her to sit down for television and things like that. But
have you ever seen Sunset Boulevard?
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah, so I've gone insane. I'm like Norma Desmond. I just sit watching my own show over and over and over in this darkly lit room with a projector screen running.
That's amazing.
No, I'm kidding. But I kind of cringe when I watch my show sometimes, just because I think I look ridiculous. But thank you, man. I appreciate that.
I disagree, and I think it's a really good counterpoint that you and Jay are both on the show. You know, Jay's an older gentleman, and what I thought was funny is that what I assumed would be the dynamic is that you would have a lot of the more, I would say, profound commentary coming from the older guy, and maybe a lot more of the pop reference coming from the younger guy, and you guys mix it up. So there's a lot of really great nuggets of wisdom that come through. I don't think that the show gets too esoteric in a way that many of the shows on Gaia do. You know, we had Peter Levenda on the show a couple of times, and what I was praising Peter about was in not pandering directly to that lowest common denominator of conspiracy theorists that seem to litter a lot of the programming, and not just on Gaia, and I don't want to sound like I'm picking on it because clearly it's a service I subscribe to, but also on the History Network and some of those shows as well.
Yeah, it's a very difficult balance to try to strike, and I think we did really well with that. And, you know, we came out of the gates with The Matrix, and we delved pretty deep into Plato and philosophy. And I think that's one of the more popular episodes. And I think it really came out well because, like you said, it's not just about lowest common denominator conspiracies. It's not just about a false flag. It's not just about here's an eye in a pyramid, you know, in the background of some scene. There is some of that, but we really run the gamut. I mean, Jay has, as you mentioned, pretty encyclopedic knowledge of film. Mm-hmm. So while he may not always bring, something allegorical or something mythological, he will definitely bring something encyclopedic that I had no idea. Like he's been around for so long doing this, mm-hmm. And I'm not knocking his age. I'm complimenting him. But he really does just throw out these wild stories and tales and facts, these factoids that I would have never come up with. So it's a good mix. And then I kind of bring the philosophical vantage point. and some of the esoteric as well. But we also tie it into a lot of real world stuff with, spies and geopolitics. So it really is, I think, a fascinating mix of topics.
Now, what's funny is that I didn't watch the shows in order. I kind of picked some of the movies that I really enjoyed, and I wanted to see what you guys had to say about it, and that made me go deeper and deeper. And then finally, I decided, why don't I just watch these from the beginning in order? As I say, having seen quite a few of them multiple times, and I had no idea, and it wasn't until I saw the Matrix episode of Decoding Hollywood that the Keanu Reeves character Neo, Mr. Anderson, when he's brought into the investigation room, his passport expires on September 11th, 2001. And I had never seen that until you pointed it out. And I stopped, the DVR. I pressed pause, and I called my wife into the room. I'm like, "You have to see this." And I wound it back and I showed it to her, and she was like, "Oh my God!" And I'm usually really up on like this stuff making it out into the zeitgeist, and I could not believe that I had never heard that. And there it was. Sure enough, you have it paused on the film. You have it shown. What I love about an aspect of Decoding Hollywood is that it's a clip show, but it's a clip show the way that Siskel and Ebert at the movies was. That it's not just completely powered by clips. It's really important to be able to go back away from just seeing the film and have the two of you guys talk and have a sort of direction away from what is now being discussed, so that when you go back into it, the setup is giving you enough to deal with. And like that one moment, it was kind of like I started recommending the show to everybody at that point.
Mr. Kennedy, I can smell your sweat. Yeah, that was a wild one. And in fact, when we brought that up to the production team, everybody on the set was kind of blown away. They were like, "This is actually in the first Matrix, and you have to blow it up kind of on the Blu-ray where you can see exactly what the data is." And yeah, it's there. It's clear as day. And this is 1998. Mm-hmm. There's quite a few films actually in the 90s that that pinpoint 9/11, 2001. Enemy of the State does with the Gene Hackman character. So there's a lot of examples of stuff like that. And a lot of people, for me being so immersed in the conspiracy world for so long, it was kind of like second hat. It's just that you get used. It's like, oh yeah, you don't know that. You didn't know that.
Yeah.
And everybody on set was just like, holy crap. But yeah, you do see this phenomenon, and I thought that we definitely had to cover that in the Matrix. There was actually a little bit of controversy as to whether we would bring that up. Mm-hmm. I'm glad that we did. I'm glad it stayed in. It didn't end up on the cutting room floor. So I think that you do have to look at these things, and you have to consider them, and it does give rise to questions about the possibility of predictive programming, the possibility of messages being inserted into film. And in fact, that was the subject of my master's thesis. So I'm not coming at this from just a theory perspective or just, I watched a bunch of YouTube videos. I actually wrote about this in an academic setting. I'm published on that topic, not just in the book, but also in academia. So this is a real topic. People really do study this. And so what we had to do was just kind of translate the academia into something that people could watch and, hopefully have a positive message in the long run. And every episode is like that. There's something unique in every one of these films, even the films that I didn't really want to do. Like I didn't really want to do Mimsy. That was kind of a goofy one, but I didn't have, the final say so on every single. Most of the episodes I chose the content, but not every single one. But yeah, there's always something interesting. And that's the great thing about philosophy, is that you can do a philosophical analysis basically of anything.
Yeah. Well, there's a great, some of the episodes, and I want to point them out because I've watched the Eyes Wide Shut episode almost as many times, I think, as I've seen the film at this point, and that's a lot. But also that it gave me a brand new appreciation for a lot of Christopher Nolan's work, that I always enjoyed it, and I knew it was operating on several levels. But some of the things that you call to attention in Interstellar, for instance, really enriched my enjoyment of the film. And I think that it's one thing to have a show that points to what a possible intention could be from a filmmaker. And it's another thing to have a show that celebrates elements that maybe get past the layperson. And as a guy who I was in film for years, in film production. I've had almost every job you can have in front of and behind a camera, but ran distribution channels for years as well. So I was watching. I watched tons of screeners. Had watched acquisition screeners for years, and you get into a sort of rote where you do pick up on things that maybe the general public doesn't, because you're thinking about ratings. And is this going to be an R rating when we bring this to the MPAA? So you think about things of nudity and swears and violence. But that some of the other things, which would seemingly connect back to the fact that I run art galleries and that I do have an understanding of the underpinnings of paintings and a little bit of that, that cosmic math that goes into things, that I should be picking up on stuff. So when it does get past me, I'm like, oh my gosh, and I go back and I want to watch it. And Interstellar, especially some of the things that you brought up, connecting not just what I think was the aim of the film in giving people a sort of general understanding of quantum physics in the way that Carl Sagan's Cosmos did about cosmology, that that it really does make it fun to go back and watch those films again. What was your favorite episode to do?
First, let me say that yes, I agree about Interstellar. Christopher Nolan's films do have some psychological depth. They do delve into Jungian archetypes, and so in that regard, they are interesting to analyze. Even Inception. You could probably even go back to Insomnia. I haven't covered Insomnia, but there would probably be some interesting archetypes that you could pick out of that film. But I do think that so his newer films are hit and miss. The first time I saw Interstellar, I really liked it because I noticed a lot of these things, and I happened to be at that point in the mood. I think where I was starting to think about working on the book, and I was in a hyper kind of academic view, and then I kind of went back and watched it 2 or 3 more times for the TV show, and it's cheesy, but there's some good stuff there. And like you said, you can actually at times go back and watch something that might maybe the first time you watched it struck you as cheesy, and then you go back and you notice, wow, there was actually quite a bit that I missed there. And this is kind of a theory that people have about how we actually read not just a book, but we actually read movies. It's almost the same process of reading. And so just as you go back and read a book again, you notice things you didn't see before. It's very similar in a film. And so that is a fascinating process. And yes, I think that you do get some neat ideas about quantum physics in Interstellar. And that was really what I focused on in my essay that I wrote that was a fairly popular essay. But I would say my favorite episode, honestly, would either be Eyes Wide Shut or Twin Peaks. And I was worried they were going to cut the Twin Peaks episode because we actually had two episodes cut that I thought were really awesome. We had a Rosemary's Baby episode that came out really soon, and they felt like it was a little too risque for the audience of Gaia, which that's their prerogative. But man, I was really hoping. And the other one that I thought was super awesome that got cut was the Ridley Scott Alien series. So we actually covered the entire Alien spectrum from the 1977 or whatever Alien all the way up to, I think, Prometheus. I don't think Alien Covenant was out by the time that we filmed that episode, but I really thought that was a cool episode. I thought that really came out good. Rosemary's Baby would have been cool, but it is what it is. So my runner-up favorites are Twin Peaks and Eyes Wide Shut.
And you did a very, very long YouTube video specifically on Eyes Wide Shut on your own channel. That
I did, and that one just hit 100,000 views, which kind of blew me away. I didn't expect that to really be as popular as it has been, just in a couple months. But yeah, so trying to produce my own, just homemade documentary style stuff, and it's the same kind of idea. But in the Hollywood Decoded situation, you're kind of bound by the time constraints and stuff gets edited down. So I really wanted to just create like an hour long analysis of Eyes Wide Shut that didn't have anything cut from it. And I'll probably go back and kind of do my own versions of, the stuff that got cut from the Gaia series too.
Now, how did that show come about? Now, clearly you had written the book Esoteric Hollywood. Did someone from Gaia Network reach out to you and say, "Hey, we've got this idea for this show, and we think we'd like to pair you with this other person"? Or was this a long process?
It wasn't really a long process. I went on about 3 years ago. I went on Sean Stone's Buzzsaw show, and Sean. I mean, I'm not saying we're not like BFF, but we got to be acquaintances and business contacts, and that led to the book deal. And so then when I had just been blogging basically while I was doing my graduate work and kind of taking the material that I was studying in graduate focus, like espionage and symbolism and how it ties into Hollywood, and just putting a lot of that material on a blog and just kind of toying around with YouTube and that kind of stuff. And so it all just kind of dominoes sort of fell in a row. And I met Chris through, I think Chris watched one of the Buzzsaw episodes, and he saw me and Sean talking about Esoteric Hollywood. And he said, "Hey, do you have a manuscript?" I didn't actually have a manuscript, but I was like, "Yeah, sure." I got a manuscript.
Like, I got to type this in a weekend.
I kind of like smushed some of the best essays together, and I had to do a lot of, editing and whatnot. So that came out at the end of 2016, December 2016. And then Jay Widener, who is known for the famous documentary Room 237, he's a pretty significant section of that documentary, maybe about a fourth of it. And then he's also known for his Kubrick documentaries. He actually reached out to me, and I recognized the name, but I didn't actually know he had any connection to Gaia. I wasn't really familiar with Gaia, and I thought it was just kind of like, hey, you want to do a YouTube thing together or something? But no, he's actually, they flew me out there, and they have this giant, facility.
That's in Colorado.
Yeah, 2 big studios. And so he proposed the idea. It was his idea. He's like, "Hey, I'm in charge of content production here at Gaia. I think we could really put together a killer 23 episode first season of a show, and have me and you kind of Siskel and Ebert style doing Siskel and Ebert 2.0." And that's so that's how it all came about. It was mainly Jay's suggestion because he had all the means. And then I kind of come in, bringing my side of the story, largely based on a lot of the material in the book.
Wow, that's great. We're going to take a quick break to hear from one of our sponsors, but we're going to be back in just about 60 seconds to talk more with Dyer about a lot of these amazing episodes and the things that lead into why they're selecting these great films to delve deeply into in an esoteric and not so esoteric way, sometimes in a deep science way. But 60 seconds away, we'll be back with Pod Sequentialism.
You bring your phone everywhere. Work, school, the movies. Now you can bring it to an Xfinity store for an easy way to switch to Xfinity Mobile, a new kind of network designed to save you money. You can get up to 5 lines of talk and text included with Xfinity Internet at no extra cost, so all you pay for is data. It's never been easier to switch to Xfinity Mobile and keep the phone you love. Click here to see how. Sorry, I gotta take this. Restrictions apply. Limited to select mobile phones. Requires activation of a new line of Xfinity Mobile. Up to 5 devices per account. New Xfinity Internet customers limited to up to 2 lines pending activation of Internet service.
Support for this podcast comes from the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center. With over 75 years of experience, their doctors treat more rare cancers in a single day than many physicians see in a lifetime. To become a patient, visit makingcancerhistory.com.
And we're back. This is Matt Kennedy. I'm your host. You're, of course, listening to Pod Sequentialism on the Meltdown Podcasting Network. And this episode, as many, are brought to you also by Gallery 30 South in Pasadena. And we want to, immediately get back into this great setup for this show. And so Dyer, who we're speaking to right now, had written a book called Esoteric Hollywood. And Jay Widener, who had been a very big part of the Stanley Kubrick documentary, was it Room
237?
237, and which has 5 amazing theories about The Shining. All of them very different, all of them very compelling in the way that they're presented, and all of them denied by the Kubrick estate, but all very fun to study because there are things that are very coincidental that we can see and we can piece together, and it's fun to study those things. But I think a lot of what you're covering in Hollywood Decoded is that there's a richer life to what we're just seeing on screen, that there is a history of certain studies and certain practices that are being alluded to at certain times. And in some cases, there are opportunities to point to other conspiracy theory type stuff that pops up, not because that it's a theory or a conspiracy of the filmmakers, but there is a direct allusion to the fact that these things exist in the zeitgeist. And some films certainly wear them on their sleeves. You can look at a film like The Rock where they directly address things, and because it's so on the nose, it's really perhaps not as much fun to cover. But then there's films that have an obvious triple, quadruple, quintuple narrative happening, and benefit from multiple viewings because of that. But then that they're so well masked that a general audience can watch it, not think too deeply about it, and then go and buy that Blu-ray and maybe watch it, and maybe because of your show pick up on some of that other stuff. And a couple of the films that we talked about being your favorites in the episodes were a couple that did not run, and now I really want to see them: the Rosemary's Baby and the Alien episodes. But that you put so much work into Eyes Wide Shut, and then into the Christopher Nolan stuff. Now, what were some of the episodes that perhaps Jay wanted to cover and brought to the table, and what were the ones that you felt you wanted to bring? And was there editorial from the channel itself?
Yes, all three. Initially, and we actually had a two-time Emmy-winning producer, Sid Goldberg, who's a great guy. Mm-hmm. He was in charge of production, and so he had an input. We had another Kate, who was good at also editing and input. And then I would say that the majority of the material was my decision, kind of based, like we said, roughly around the book. And so, like in my book, I cover Eyes Wide Shut, The Shining, 2001 for Kubrick, and of course Jay's sort of a Kubrick expert in a way, so he was totally fine with anything Kubrick. And then I just kind of threw out some ideas for Spielberg because we wanted to hit the big name directors.
Right.
I really wish we'd gotten into Hitchcock. Maybe if there's a season 2, we'll hit on Hitchcock. But we got to AI and Minority Report and transhumanism, and then we did, like I said, a really good Alien episode. I guess no one will ever see that. I don't think we didn't get to Bond either, and actually Bond is a big part of my book. I think it's a whole 60 or 70 pages section of my book, because it's just fascinating with the reality of what Ian Fleming, as a master spy himself, saw, putting it into these fictional, goofy James Bond stories. So we didn't actually cover any of that. Those were some of the things that I suggested.
Fleming wrote a great couple of travelogue books too in the
I have
early
heard that.
60s.
I've never read those, but
they're pretty fascinating. You sort of get an idea that a lot of what he was writing about was this kind of fantasy idea of what he had hoped being a spy was like, and because he was predominantly an analyst, but that he did have to go and visit different, shall we say, off-campus offices that the British Secret Service had in different places. And so he talks about,
right,
hey, here's
exactly.
where you go. Here's the type of cocktail you get here. And it's like a layperson's guide to a spy's world that maybe never existed.
Lay guide to being
but it's so
the
much fun to
everyman's
read.
James Bond. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. So that would be a great kind of lead into being able to talk about his characters. But I think that also in your book you talk about the modern Bond films, and quite a few of them don't really go directly back into what Fleming wrote, but have been addressed by more recent writers who love the work clearly, but wanted to bring something, I think, maybe even more substantive to the franchise. So that would be fascinating.
Yeah, and I think that even mainstream outlets like The Guardian recognized that in Spectre you had a very clear almost obvious reference to kind of Snowden style leaks about GCHQ and the Nine Eyes spying system that really represents, the NSA and GCHQ, which is the British version of the NSA. So I don't think that. Yeah, I think that actually, when you watch something like Spectre, you're really seeing proof of the thing that I contend and that I write about. It's so obvious that the plot of the film is actually mirroring real world events with Snowden and so forth. So, but I did want to say that I was thinking through the content. Actually, most of the episodes that I suggested, Jay and I are so on the same page most of the time. We do have a little bit of contention, and they did say actually that if there's a season 2, they would like to see more disagreement.
Yeah, they want to play that up.
Which
That's
could be
fun to
fun.
watch.
But we tend to usually agree on things. So pretty much every movie I suggested, Jay agreed with. And then I think that Gaia later came along and they suggested 6 extra episodes, because we filmed 17, and then they wanted 6 more that they could sprinkle in that were not so esoteric. In other words, they felt like the Twin Peaks was a little too much. The Chinatown almost got cut. It was a little too much.
Wow.
So they suggested Star Trek, that Next Generation episode, which I don't mind doing a Star Trek. I kind of wish we'd done like the whole gamut of Star Trek, but it was kind of focused on one episode.
Yeah, or at least been starting with like some of the original series, which has so much great esoteric content in it.
I was going to say, yeah, the originals would be great, and you can always talk about I think we actually did talk about the tie-ins to the Rand Corporation and how the Rand Corporation was actually consulting on Star Trek and so forth. But yeah, so that was their suggestions, and then actually both the producer and somebody, I can't remember if it was from Miramax or I don't remember who, but there was somebody who was tweeting me and was like, we made Mimsy and we watched your episode and we thought it was great. So that's kind of surprised me, because I would have thought that you never know when your stuff's going to be considered too conspiratorial and but I would imagine quite a few directors and producers of these various episodes have watched some of these. So
yeah, and I imagine that there's got to be a certain amount of flattery to being selected, and in some cases someone's saying, well, thank God someone picked up on that. It's like you spend a lot of time crafting a movie. Oftentimes you want to get stuff past the producers. I'd love to see you guys tackle Revolver, which is, a completely Kabbalistic film. And I mean, that might be too long of an episode because almost every single scene was composed specifically around the Kabbalah. And it wasn't a very successful film, but I could see that if you were to tackle this, that it gets a new life among people who would come at it because they like the other things that you've tackled. And I would assume that
that's a great point. I mean, that's part of the difficulty in the selection process, is that sometimes you want to do a film that's really full of symbolism. I mean, there's a lot of Darren Aronofsky films that you could really pick apart, but then some of the Darren Aronofsky films aren't that well known.
Right.
Or they didn't necessarily perform that well at the box office, which I don't think that should dominate your decision process. But the problem is that you also have to be conscious of, like, if you choose a film that nobody's watched, you know what I mean, or that's very obscure, it's going to get a very obscure response. It's going to get a very so even the Twin Peaks, this kind of blew me away. Like, I thought the Twin Peaks was just going to be mind blowing. It was going to be the bomb. I'm a huge fan of David Lynch and the series. And I think maybe even we did another David Lynch. I think we did Mulholland Drive, and it got cut too. That was one of the other ones that got cut.
That needs to come out. Like the Mulholland Drive.
See, that's what I think.
The most argued about film, of my lifetime.
The Gaia audience, I don't think, resonated with Twin Peaks. So the Twin Peaks episode, which I think is my favorite, that and Eyes Wide Shut, I don't think it's had that large of a response from the Gaia audience. I mean, all the episodes have like 95, 93, 94% thumbs up. But I don't think the numbers of people who were interested in decoding Twin Peaks from the Gaia audience were that big, which is weird because, like, on my YouTube channel, some of the highest views I have are Eyes Wide Shut and Twin Peaks. So
Right.
it's kind of weird.
Well, I guess you can. Oh, well, I guess the Gaia owns the episodes as they were shot, so you wouldn't be able to actually put them on your YouTube channel. You'd have to do your own kind of version of it.
Correct. Yeah, they own, or I don't remember. I can't remember if it's Jay that owns it or Gaia that owns it, but yeah, something like that.
But they could still surface for season 2, and certainly if if
Yeah,
you
maybe some mole inside Gaia could leak these really cool episodes. I'm not condoning that. I'm joking.
Right. Now, for people who aren't familiar, and I've only really discussed Gaia a couple times on the show. Gaia is a subscription service that you can add onto your Roku device or other cable streaming devices, and I would say that it's broken up predominantly into 2 categories: yoga and conspiracy. And I think that the shows that succeed the best on the latter, I think that there's some great yoga programming. Quite a few people who subscribe specifically for the yoga programming. They have been getting the rights to showing some esoteric and spiritual films. It's been a direct outlet for premieres of lower budget, very spiritually motivated, kind of new age type films, and then occasionally other things. And when they started doing the original programming, the first shows that I think most people would have been aware of would be like the Secret Space Program shows because of the connection to ancient aliens. And that's the show that I generally point to as being gone way off the deep end, and that there seems to be absolutely no vetting towards what could be the truth and what couldn't be. That if you have any kind of understanding of human psychology, that there's a lot of gives and ticks from the primary guest, that he's just enjoying a rich fantasy life, and the host is just kind of like trying to egg it on to get more and more ridiculous. But then you've also got Sean's show, that Buzzsaw is kind of exactly what you'd want from Sean Stone. You want a show that addresses conspiracy theory stuff, and Sean, it's a very well designed set. But Sean does get also very, very esoteric on occasion, but he sort of does tend to be the anchor of what could be a little too much versus what is just the right amount. And so when your show started and I started getting it recommended in the on the menu page because of other things I'd watched, I was like, how come I haven't heard of this yet? I was like, oh, it's a fairly new show. And I went in and started watching it. I'm like, well, this is sort of like, this would be exactly the center. Like, this is the new middle for Gaia. Like, what is the exact middle road between fact-based instructional programming and something that addresses people who really, really enjoy that conspiratorial aspect of the rest of the programming on Gaia. And because you've got 2 hosts and they have a great rapport, and they both have a very different sort of performance sensibility, that there's something there for, I think, everybody to enjoy. There's a good counterpoint. It's great to hear that you guys have so much agreement, and there's a great sense of camaraderie that comes off in the show. And the show has an incredibly high production value. When you say that it's sort of like a Siskel and Ebert, I mean, it has a production value of a network television show. And there's not much else like that on Gaia. A lot of it is basically, kind of talking head programming. I mean, there's even shows with, the Coast to Coast host has a show, but it's really just coast to coast in front of an audience. And, that there's not a lot of dropped in clips. It's really just a couple of people talking in front of an audience and then a question and answer thing. So people could comparatively say that's more like, local access television. But I certainly hope that they renew your show for a second season, because I really want to see the episodes you've talked about that we haven't seen. But I'd also like to hear about, what drew you to this? Like, what's your history in fascination with film and with esotericism, and what led you to even conceiving of your blog, which led to the book, which led to the show?
Well, basically, I just grew up in a family that was a fan of the arts. So my mom was always a big fan of literature, and she was a librarian for a while, and then she was an editor for a big company. So I was always surrounded by books. I grew up a bibliophile, and then I always wanted to just really do theater and comedy. That was kind of all I had in mind when I was growing up in high school. And I'd written some stand-up routines and was doing amateur night when I was 17 or 18 pretty regularly. And then I felt like I wanted more out of life than just, trying to be an actor or something like that. So I took a philosophical turn in life, and I went to college and studied philosophy as an undergrad and history. And then I decided I wanted to continue that and went into graduate studies in the subjects of, as I said, history, philosophy, literature. And then I because I was simultaneously on the side hobby project interested in conspiracy, I wanted a way to tie in all of these seemingly disparate disciplines into one focus of study. And then what you find is that espionage or intelligence studies or spy fiction is actually a great way to do that, because oftentimes it's based in reality. And of course, so many spy films actually are based in reality. So when I was doing my graduate work, that's what I decided I would focus on. And you have a little more leeway when you're doing grad work, that you can kind of pick the subjects that you want to really delve deep into.
Right.
And so that's how it all came about. And simultaneously, I've always just loved movies. I've been a big movie buff all my life. And I remember a lot of movies sticking out to me as I was growing up as things that I didn't really understand. And like the first time I saw Lost Highway, I thought, well, there's got to be something going on here. I like other David Lynch movies, but this one, I just have no idea what's going on in this.
Very, very similar sensibility. I was a film critic here in Los Angeles on KLSX, and reviewed that film when it was coming out. And I'm like, I'm a huge David Lynch fan. I can't make heads or tails of this, so it's hard for me to recommend it. But that said, I'm going to go see it again next week. So take from that what you will, when I was talking to my audience, because we had to walk that line of like, I liked less commercial stuff, but I knew that the audience was a more general audience. And so I had to kind of preface it. But that's that year was an incredible year, because Starship Troopers was that year too. And there's so much stuff in Starship Troopers.
Yeah, it's a great satire of the military-industrial complex. Mm-hmm. And then when you read Heinlein and you realize that, he's talking about a lot of these real-world ideas in his science fiction, you start to realize, again, there's all these tie-ins and all these parallels. And, back in my 20s, I didn't really think that there was that much of a connection. And then when you really get into it in the college scene and you're studying this stuff, in depth and reading tons of books on it, you really are just blown away. You can't believe how, for example, how much influence the CIA has had in Hollywood. You can't believe how much reality is in a fiction movie that seems ridiculous. For example, in the new book, I'm writing the sequel to Esoteric Hollywood right now, and I'm actually picking out some really wacky, preposterous stuff to focus in on that you wouldn't expect, just because it has something like weather control, geoengineering. That's a real thing. Yeah. Right. And it's in some of the most ridiculous movies, like the 1998 Avengers with Ray Fiennes and Uma Thurman and Sean Connery. Yeah. So you've got MK Ultra and geoengineering literally referenced in this most ridiculous top Razzie winning film.
Yeah. Terrible movie.
Sometimes you have to even, I think, look at the ridiculous stuff. You can look at Josie and the Pussycats. You have this.
Oh, Josie and the Pussycats has some amazing, great criticism about media.
It does. And you wouldn't think it on the surface. And then you watch the film and you're actually the military industrial complex has like this huge invested interest in steering pop culture. Yeah. You know what I mean? And that's the point of that movie. And who would have thought that, some kind of goofy girl comedy from like 2000 would have that in there. But yeah, so there's all these nuggets like this that you can dig up. There's, what's that?
Remember the episode of Alf, which caused a massive lawsuit, that the Alf cartoon, not the live action show, but the Saturday morning cartoon, and a woman, like a soccer mom, was taping the show on her VCR for her kids who had soccer practice on Saturdays because they like to watch Alf. And so she liked to edit out the commercials. And I don't think she necessarily had like a flying erase head VCR. I think it was an unsophisticated VCR setup. So she actually was winding back from going too far in a commercial because she was on a phone call to be able to stop it at the perfect point, and found that there was a 3-frame insertion of an American flag in the middle of the animated transitions on Alf. And
Wow.
it led to a massive there was an investigation, but there was a massive class action suit against NBC Television on behalf of this woman saying, well, this is a type of programming for our children. This was obviously intentional. This was not something that was animated. It's a photograph of a waving flag that is inserted for 3 frames in a broadcast program. And this was, I remember reading about this in TV Guide,
Wow.
back in it had to have been the late 80s. It was when that show was still on. And TV Guide was kind of a great place to be able to dissect stuff. You had the Cheers and Jeers section that was getting hip in the 80s, and then you had these great little capsule descriptions of shows. So you could use that as a basis of planning out your viewing. And I was a kid who didn't get much sleep, and so I'd be staying up all hours of the day and kind of planning out what I was going to tape and what I was going to watch. But that was the first time I'd ever heard of anything like that, and that led me to read, the book, a couple of the books about advertising. Not just books written by David from BBDO, but also the psychology books that were written about programming. The famous one with the photograph of the glass of a cocktail glass with sex written in the ice. And that kind of was a springboard for me being interested in this. So it's great to kind of hear how people come to these things. And you're doing a really good job. I can't wait for your next book. I certainly hope that you get a second season. And and by all means, where can people get a hold of you?
If there's not a second season of Gaia, I feel confident that there will probably be other types of projects that will come along that will be similar. So if anybody's interested in what I talk about, you can go to jaysanalysis.com. All my stuff is linked there. I have a growing YouTube channel. You can just Google my name and it comes up, Dyer. And then, all the socials, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter and all that, Instagram. So any of those means you can follow my work. And I do put out daily content. There's a wide variety of, so sometimes I'll talk about philosophy for an hour, hardcore. Sometimes I'll talk about history. Sometimes it's movie analysis. So it's kind of all over the place. And there's not really any plan day to day as to what it's going to be. It just is what it is. But I did want to mention too, that was a great point you made. I didn't know that about Alf. And I've been studying this stuff for a long time, at least 10 years at a serious level. And you're constantly hearing new stuff like that. I was just, I heard an author the other day talking about Roman Holiday, the Audrey Hepburn movie. She mentions the European Union in that movie prior to people knowing about the coming EU.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and there's all kinds of neat stuff like that I'm constantly learning, figuring out new ones. You know what I mean? Like, how is this being mentioned in this movie?
Wow.
So many years before it was common knowledge. That you've got just a great example would be Running Man. Arnold gets on the internet, which is in the movie, it's the Infonet.
Yeah.
And he orders his plane ticket in 1987. Now, if you as I've pointed out many times, if you worked at the military industrial complex or your dad was some high level military guy, you might have known about the internet. But most people in 1987 had no idea what the internet was. But in the fictional world of Running Man, it's presented as a daily, everybody's house is connected to the internet.
Yeah. And we had some of the college B2B boards back in the early 80s in high schools and in junior high schools. This was the case in one of the programs I was in Massachusetts, Project Summit. But that most people had no idea. And when we were talking about, to other kids, one day a week we would take this class where a certain group of us were sequestered from the rest of the school and sometimes moved to
Mhm.
different schools, and they would give us these very strange. I mean, it sounds like the parallax view. It's like these really strange kind of void comp tests and problem solving things, and they would.
Dude, I
bring-
went through the same thing in California. In San Diego, they had a program
Wow.
that was like that.
And it's like, you think about it years later, it's like, was I programmed? Is the phone going to
Yeah,
ring? And
no,
I'll
it's
be
like,
like,
was
I
that
must
some
kill the
weird
queen.
thing? Right.
Like the naked gun.
Right.
Well, awesome, Jay. Thanks for coming on and doing this. And I'm absolutely going to be an advocate for bringing the show back. I'm a big fan of what you do. I'm really psyched that Chris Milligan at Trine Day was able to put us together and recommend that I reach out. And, if anybody who hasn't checked out Hollywood Decoded on Gaia, to me, it would be a worthwhile reason by itself to subscribe to the channel. And if you're somebody who likes to, if you're the type of person that subscribes to HBO while Game of Thrones is on and then you unsubscribe, I would say subscribe, watch all Hollywood Decoded, and then you can cancel your subscription. You can get it back when they bring it back for another season. But there's going to be other stuff that you may also find enjoyable on the show, and certainly I've been hanging in there. But I think the show lends itself to multiple viewings.
Thank you. I mean, what I do is separate from Gaia. Gaia is really just a platform of distribution, like comparable to Netflix. So,
right.
The work that I do really has no direct connection to Gaia. So, and I'm not trying to diss Gaia or say anything negative. I'm just stating that I get a lot of questions about that. They're like, "Do you work for Gaia?" And I was, no, I do my own thing.
It's just a guy who has a show and they bought it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, awesome, man. This has been a great episode, and we, of course, encourage everybody to tune into other episodes of Pod Sequentialism. This will be episode, I believe, 106 or 107. We'll see where it winds up in the sequence. But again, I thank my guests. I encourage everybody to seek more. And if this has sounded like something you really want to explore, get a hold of Dyer's other projects online and follow those.
Can I make one last point?
Oh, yeah, please do.
One thing I do offer at the website is signed copies of the book, and that's just because Amazon kind of does undercut authors a bit.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want a signed copy, which I mail out quite a few of those every week, just go to Jay's Analysis, and you'll see the tabs there for ordering a signed copy through PayPal.
That's perfect, and we always encourage people to seek out the creators that they like individually. And if you can reward people directly, you absolutely should. There are certain occasions where authors do want to steer certain traffic through specific avenues, including Amazon. But in a case where a book has been out for a while and you have a situation where there are, it's not the best financial situation or situational split between publishing and author, we always encourage you to get from the author, or at least listen to how the author wants you to buy that project. So hey, thanks again, man. Thanks for coming on the show.
Awesome. Thank you.